Hi, my name is Kevin Millington, and I'm happy to be the president of the Empire State Aero Sciences Museum here in Glenville, and as a continuation of our oral and video history series. I'm really happy to be here with a special person at the museum, John Panoski. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
John is a great volunteer at the museum. He's currently vice president, has been on the board of directors for years, and has extensive experience not only flying but here at the museum. John, give us a little background on your childhood. When were you born?
Well, I was a World War II baby. I was born just prior to World War II, January 1939. I grew up in Schenectady, and I have vague memories of the war. I had family members. I had an uncle who was a lieutenant commander in the Navy in the Pacific, involved in several battles, including the Aleutians, and he would come home and tell his stories. And my other uncle was in the Army. He was in the Third Army and Patton's Army, if you would, and he was involved in first crossing of the Rhine River into Aachen, Germany, and brought back many stories and artifacts and what have you. But to make a long story short, I came decision time, and I decided, in lieu of the fact I had a younger brother, and I had hoped to go to college, but I thought maybe my brother would go. I'll join the Air Force.
John, I remember you told me a really good story. That one of your first experiences with aviation was a child here in Schenectady, and right here at the airport. You would hang out at the airport, be in the airplane.
Oh yeah,
and that someone at the time, the 109th Airlift Wing was the 109th Fighter Group.
It was 139th Fighter Interceptor
okay,
Squadron.
and that tell us about that shortly about your experience on
as you mentioned,
P-47s.
Yeah, I was about 12, 13, maybe 14 years old. I think it was about 13 years old at the time. It was in the 50s. It was just before the Korean War, in fact, because 1951 was the beginning of the Korean War, and they had two B-26s. Those were Douglas B-26s, not the Martin. And both of those were taken back to be flown in the Korean effort. Those were utility aircraft, and of course, the fighter unit at the time, they had 27 F-47s, which was the World War II P-47s.
Well, that was a legendary fighter in World War II.
Yeah, these were D models, and a number of the pilots that flew in the unit at the time were combat vets.
So after the war,
the Air Guard formed in 1949.
These were passed along to the Air National Guard
yes.
in the late 40s and 50s, and the
yeah,
P-47 was a legendary fighter.
Yes.
You got to see them.
Well, at the time, the security at Schenectady County Airport wasn't too secure. And as in summertime, I ride my bike out, and I'd pack a lunch sometimes and sit there watching these guys work on the airplanes. And one day, a guy by the name of Al Luther, who was a combat vet in the Pacific, he came over and says, "Hey, kid," he called me over and he says, "You want to help us out?" And one of the armorers was getting ready to armor the machine guns, and 50 calibers, 4 of them in each wing, and they had a tow airplane that would drag what they call a drag line and a sleeve, which was a big, long, maybe 30, 40-foot sleeve, and they'd go out over Lake Ontario, and the planes would shoot at that sleeve with different colored painted tips on the bullets. And one airplane would have yellow, one would have red, green, blue, whatever. Okay. And that way there, when they came in and dropped that sleeve, the armorers could pick off the colors and see how many hits from that particular airplane. But anyway, the guy gave me a screwdriver. He says, "See those airplanes?" He says, "See this panel?" So I jumped up on the wing. He said, "I want you to take the panels off." I forget, 4 or 5 airplanes that come down the line, which is what I did. Well, that sort of sealed the friendship from there on. And I would go there, and of course they'd invite me to have my lunch with them, lunch break, and we'd sit under a wing of a P-47. I was so enthused. But what really clicked me off was Al one day says, "Hey, come on with me." He says, "We got to run this airplane up." I said, "Run the airplane up? What's he going to do here?" So they had done some magneto changes or whatever, carburetor change, and they had to check the engine out. And so he jumps in the cockpit. He says, "Okay, jump on my lap." And I sat on his lap, and he took the stick, pulled it back, put the seat belt around, and yanked it tight so the stick wouldn't move. And of course, that pulled the elevator up, kept the tail down. He said, "We're going to start this animal." And he went through the complete cockpit checklist, pointed out, but he says, "Now I want you to start this airplane." I said, "Me start the
Oh,
airplane?"
God, that's a great story. And you were about 15 years old then? And,
yeah, I was less than that. It was probably about 14, 13, 14. But anyway, I remember the sequence. We had to crack the throttle, mixture control, primer. There was a primer in the upper right-hand corner, and then you had the battery switch on, and then you hit energize, energize, and you could hear the starter motor go, increasing in RPM and speed. And he says, "Okay, now engage it." And you hit it, engage, and what happened was it had a flywheel on it, and it would then engage the engine, and it had the momentum and energy to turn the engine over. And he says, "Count 8 blades, and then turn that mag switch on." And I counted the blades, 1, 2, 3. In other words, 2 rotations of the engine.
The P-47 had a huge, as I recall,
It was
a
an
radio
R2800.
engine.
It was a Pratt Whitney.
It drove a big,
Big four-bladed
propeller.
Oh,
A very powerful plane.
Yeah.
That was a good story.
But anyway, when that engine started, it filled the cockpit up with smoke, and that was like an elixir. I was hooked. I had to be in the Air Force.
So that's how you got your flying bug. Why don't you tell us about a typical mission? What would your missions be?
Well, put it simply, sundown, gear up. A lot of night flying, but no. Now, the airplane, of course, it's a crew airplane. Normal crew. The basic crew, as they would call it, would be pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer. And of course, over water, we'd have to have a nav. And for transition, for flying around the flagpole, as they call it, you'd only need basically pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and an observer, either a flight mechanic or a loadmaster, usually a loadmaster. And that would be for training and transitional training for pilots. We may have 3 or 4 pilots on board. Each pilot would get maybe a couple landings, takeoffs, and then another guy would jump in the seat, and the instructor would be there, or a flight examiner for a check ride, that kind of thing. But going on a live mission, you had to have 1, sometimes 2, depending on the length of the mission, 2 navigators, and of course 2 loadmasters normally for a cargo mission, a freight mission.
Well, were your normal missions transporting cargo from?
Anything from women's stockings to dead bodies and everything in between. I mean, used to bring back combat casualties out of Vietnam, out of Da Nang, Tan Son Nhut, Cam Ranh Bay, bring them back to Honolulu. Tripler General Hospital was a big hospital. Of we would bring back a number of combat casualties. And it'd be scary sometimes, especially taking off at night out of Da Nang. Of course, you had to turn all the lights out because anything with light on, they'd shoot at you. You could see the fireflies going off. It looked like fireflies popping at you. And
it's a stressful flight, huh? Stressful mission, I would think.
Well, as soon as you broke ground, you pull the gear up and turn all the lights off. All the beacon lights, landing lights, the wheel well lights, anything. Turn all the lights off because they could spot the airplane and start shooting at it.
Sure. What was your job as flight engineer? Where did you sit in the? What was your crew position?
My crew position was just behind the pilot and the co-pilot, just about where that bubble is. That's the navigator's bubble.
Okay. I
had a panel just facing to the right wing with all the engine controls, and they would control, of course, the fuel system, electrical system, pressurization. The turbo trough had turbochargers. I had control of each turbo. I can synchronize them all and had 1 manual control. All 4 throttles, and then the overhead panels would have either circuit breakers, fire control lights, fire warning lights, and then fire handles. In fact, they got a little unique story down there. One time I came out to pre-flight early in the morning. It was Sunday morning, as I recall. I forget, we had a training mission. Over water nav mission for navigators. But anyway, I hear this strange engine sound. It wasn't a piston engine or a radial engine. It was a smoother sound. It was almost like a P-51. And in fact, I looked, and it was a P-51. And it came right over the runway, pulled up in a classic fighter approach, turned around, came back downwind, and landed. And the guy jumps out with an orange flight suit on, and with his hands on his head like this. on the runway.
What was that all
And
about?
I'm free-flighting the airplane, and all of a sudden, all these gumball machines come flying out, the fire trucks and the police and all that. And what it was a Dominican Republic P-51 that had shot up a radio station. They had a Palace or something in
Oh my
Dominican.
God, really? And
And
he had flown to Puerto Rico to raid the
He
airport
flew and considered himself
surrendered or
surrendered to the U.S. military.
Oh, God.
And the airplane, they towed it off and they pulled it next to us. Well, I got a picture of me standing on the wing.
I'd like to see that.
I
sometime.
gotta find it though.
I'd like to see that.
The guy
Yeah.
took it. It was 35 millimeter.
All right.
So
Did you have any memorable?
experiences?
Yeah.
One time, off the coast of where we were going up to Alaska, and it was at night, and we had to go through it wasn't really a storm per se, but it was a heavy precip at altitude, and all of a sudden the cockpit started to turn blue, and there was glass out in front, and it was growing. All of a sudden there's sparks and electricity, like St. Elmo's fire. It scared the living daylights out of me.
No
I'd
kidding.
never seen
Oh,
that
yeah.
before. And then, of course, getting hit by lightning coming out of Myrtle Beach one time. That scared the
Oh
living
my God! Your
daylights out.
plane got hit by lightning.
Oh yeah.
I would imagine. A tanker carrying a lot of flammable fuel.
We had two antennas here, and of course there was a radar dome here for the navigator's radar for hookup. But anyway, these two HF antennas went up to the tail, and we got hit by lightning. And I had my hands on the throttle because you had to reduce RPM and reduce airspeed to 160 knots. They call it penetration speed. You go 2,700 RPM to get gyroscopic stability with the propellers. The highest RPM you could get on those engines without over boosting, and the slower airspeed to go penetrate this thunderstorm. And all of a sudden, bang! A big explosion. I looked back. We had a monorail went down the center of the fuselage, and it glowed all the way down. When it hit the tail, it just exploded.
God, really?
Oh my God! And when it hit, I could feel the heat on my arm because I had my hands on the throttles trying to stabilize it, and I could feel it instant. Like somebody passed it.
What year was this, or when was this?
Oh, I don't know, 63, 4, somewhere in there. I forget.
So you're taking off from Myrtle Beach Air
Yeah,
Force Base in
Myrtle Beach.
South,
We popped out of
in
that
South
cloud.
Carolina,
Yeah.
and you're hit by lightning, the midair lightning strike. So what happened?
Actually, well, we landed. I think we wound up in Dover, but all the prop tips were blackened, were burnt, and the one antenna. When we landed, we kept hearing this bang, bang, bang on the side of the fuselage, like somebody knocking to get in. And it was one of the had ceramic insulators on it. Was fluttering in the wind, and it kept banging on the fuselage. It had burned off the pylon. There's a mount here. The antenna had taken a full shot and it melted the wire.
Oh my God! It was a
Banging on.
stressful. That's a heck of a story, John.